Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Hiking the Liberal Arts, the Kiplin Hall Story Chat with Dr. Richard Gillen. My name is Jack Despo, and I'm an admissions counselor here at Washington College, a member of the class of 2018, and an alum of the 2016 Kiplin Hall trip. This evening, I will be joined by Dr. Gillen himself, Dr. Katie Charles, who will be taking over the Kiplin Hall program in Dr. Gillen's retirement, and three other Kiplin Hall and Washington College alums. Dr. Gillen taught English at Washington College for over 30 years with a focus on English Romanticism and 18th and 19th century English literature. Dr. Gillen's passion for the works of William Wordsworth and the Romantic poets, as well as the natural beauty of the English and Irish countryside, led him to create the Kiplin Hall program, where students would hike the land that inspired the Romantic writers. For a lot of students, including myself, this trip was a game changer for them. The beauty of the Kiplin Hall program was how easy and enjoyable it was to learn about the literature and history of the area, as well as learning valuable life skills and enjoying the camaraderie of a 3-week hiking trip with fellow students. This evening, Dr. Gillen will speak about the Kiplin Hall program and his new book, Hiking the Liberal Arts. Then we will bring on Dr. Charles to speak on the new direction of the program. And after Dr. Charles, our alums from the Kiplin Hall trip will tell us a little bit about themselves and their experiences before we move on to a live Q&A chat with members of the audience. Before I hand it over to Dr. Gillen, I want to review some housekeeping items. Both your cameras and microphones are turned off for this event. However, we will be taking live questions during this panel, so please utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions for the panel. You're welcome to submit them throughout the program. No need to wait until our panelists are done speaking. If we are unable to answer all of your questions today, your student's admissions counselor will be following up later this week as long as we have a name associated with your question. I'd also like to remind the audience that at the conclusion of this event, one lucky attendee will receive a free signed copy of Hiking the Liberal Arts. It is now my pleasure to hand things over to my favorite professor during my time at Washington College, Dr. Richard Gillen.
Well, thank you, Jack, and welcome all of you students to this evening where we're talking about Kiplin Hall. I have a series of photos from years past that will be on display in a minute or so, but pardon me. I've been asked to talk a bit about how this program started and what is the Kiplin Hall program. First of all, Kiplin Hall is the ancestral home of the Calvert family who founded Maryland. And in 1998, we were asked by the then president of the college, the provost, and also the head of the chairman of the board of trustees to come up with a program to be able to use Kiplin Hall, I should say the study center at Kiplin Hall. And very rapidly, my wife, Barbara, and I put together a program. We had had experience in the north of England when we were graduate students in 1970 and 71. We spent 2 summers in the Lake District and fell in love with it and always dreamed about bringing students there. When the proposal was made, we both immediately knew exactly what we were going to do. In order to make it function, we had to be very careful with our budget and to make sure that we kept it as inexpensive as possible. Barbara drove one van and I drove another. We prepared all our food ourselves, which also included shopping and doing those quotidian things that you need to do to keep a number of people going. In the first year, we had hoped to have about 10 students, and it turns out we had 12. And in subsequent years, we had more. We got about as high as 18, and we really didn't want that many. We wanted to make it as personal as possible and small. The aim of the program was to go to those places associated with poetry that was written in or about specific locations, and then have our own experiences in those locations. And to that end, we decided that we would literally hike into the mountains of the Lake District, the moors where the Brontes lived and where they wrote, as well as along the cliffs of the North Sea, particularly the section going from Whitby down to Robin Hood's Bay. Again, the proposition was that students would be reading poetry, largely 19th century poetry and a lot of Wordsworth and Coleridge, and then having those experiences in the actual landscapes. pardon me, uh, the organization of the whole trip was something my wife handled very, very well. I would have botched it up if I was in charge of the administrative part. But from the very beginning, there was a sense of camaraderie and intimacy. And from my point of view, as a professor, it was literally the best classroom in the world to talk about romantic poetry. Um, pardon me. And in addition to the academic side, so to speak, we found that the intimacy, a very good intimacy with students, was very heartening. Uh, in the first couple of days when we'd be at Kiplin Hall, everyone was very respectful, and it would be, oh, Dr. Gillen this, Dr. Gillen that. And about the third or fourth day, it was, hey, give me that. And it wasn't meant to be nasty. It was just that if we were hiking, we needed to act quickly often. And so that sense of trust really came through. And I think that the advantage of doing what we did, the hiking part particularly, became more and more apparent as the first year wore on and in subsequent years. The thing I'm surprised at the last time we went with the last group of students in 2017 was that in the very beginning, we used to hike, we hiked the largest mountains in England. And that's not to say that they're like uh, the Rockies, but they're demanding enough. In any case, uh, we found that that dependency that people evolved into in trusting people that were around you and trusting people to help out really formed bonds that I think are still very strong today. At least that's what I hear from former students. Um, we had many days where the English weather can be really pretty sporadic and erratic, I should say. And we would be hiking because we had determined we were going to hike that day into atmosphere that included sidewoods, rain, lots of wind, and cold. But even in those days, as difficult as they could be, where we would be having lunch, where our lunches were sodden with rain and nothing like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that's loaded with rainwater and falling apart. But even in those days, as difficult as they were, there was a sense of unity and a sense, once again, of trust. And I think I wouldn't want to say that we relished all of that, but it was a good thing. It turned out to be a good thing. Pardon me. The question I have also is about writing the book. How did that come about? Well, back in 2015, in that range, there was a lot of commentary about MOOCs. These were massive open online courses, and they were being touted as the way of the future, that they would have superstar professors from very notable elite institutions teaching wonderful courses, and it would all be online. And I had no disrespect for the superstars, but I thought the whole idea just seemed to me to be misguided, that it missed the idea of what we were doing in a liberal arts college, and that is that our aim was to make poetry palpable, make the understanding of poetry something that was uh, basically physical in many ways. In any case, I started writing an academic book. I collected lots of articles, lots of books, and had started in that direction. And as it turns out, after graduation, I think it was 2015, maybe 16, a number of faculty members got together after graduation in a pub in Chestertown, and we were talking over, plans for the future. And a fellow member of the English department, Bob Mooney, said, "Why don't I write a book about Kiplin Hall?" And my wife, Barbara, said correctly, she had been saying that for a couple of years. Anyway, they kind of ganged up on me a little bit, and I said, "Well, okay, I'll think about it." And they said, "No, no, you have to do it." And so I did. My wife pointed out that I had only taken one sabbatical in 40 some odd years, and it was time. And anyway, to make a long story short, I got the sabbatical, I got time off, and I wrote the manuscript. And uh, because of a number of interventions and circumstances in my family, things were put off and until last spring, roughly about this time. And both of my daughters, I've been living with my daughter Courtney and her husband Frank here in Baltimore. They insisted that I get back to writing the book or editing the book. And I had lost all interest in it and didn't want to do it. But I was cajoled, ultimately pleasantly. And I did. I really got at it. And over the summer, after the reviewers sent back their reviews, which were very encouraging, I decided to edit the book really severely. So I had a manuscript at about 320 some odd pages, and I cut it basically in half. And I wanted to make it more readable and make it more accessible, so to speak. And then in December it was published, and I'm very happy that I was pushed into the last lap, so to speak. Um, just in kind of a summation, because I'm running over time here, I would just say that the experiences at Kiplin Hall were wonderful, unforgettable, and one of the highlights of my life as a professor. So let me turn this over to Dr. Katie Charles, who is professor highly regarded in the English department, professor of 18th and 19th century literature, and she is the new face and new director of the Kiplin Hall program. Katie?
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to screen share here as well. I think all of you can understand that being the person who is charged with the task of stepping into the shoes of Professor Richard Gillen has a mighty, mighty set of responsibilities. But I'm definitely someone who believes that, with great responsibility comes great promise. And here's a tiny snapshot of the 5 or 6 days that Professor Gillen and I spent ambling over these trails, driving down those curvy hedge-lined roads of the Lake District in England. I'm going to give you some practical information about the trip and what it might look like in the future when we're able to do this sort of thing again. But I just want to start off by introducing myself with a little bit more specificity. As Professor Gillen said, I cover British and actually global literatures of the 18th and 19th century for the English department here at Washington College. And my special focus within that is on the first century of the novel in English. I'm interested in the messy novels that emerged before there are clear rules and before the kind of conventions of the novel are fully consolidated, and then how those new technologies for expressing things like point of view kind of take hold. And also the role of critics in responding to some of those experiments in form. But in any case, what we're talking about today is something really embodied. And I love what Professor Gillen said about the idea that poetry can be palpable and physicalized. And it's no surprise that Professor Gillen would believe that as an out and out romanticist. Professor Gillen dedicated his life study and teaching to the Romantic period, to poets like William Wordsworth, to William Wordsworth's journal keeping sister, Dorothy Wordsworth, William Blake, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And really, I think a lot of the impetus of this trip is to plunge a group of people, a group of sometimes strangers at the beginning of the trip, into these landscapes and into this kind of micro society that grows up over the course of the time spent together, and to hike these trails and to have sometimes indeed very bracing physical experiences that help us integrate the kind of thinking that we're doing about poetry and with literature. And I'm going to take a couple of additional directions, because I will just go ahead and say that the Kiplin Hall trip that I envision leading is 100% the brainchild of Rich and Barbara Gillen. They built this, this beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'm only interested in carrying that forward. A couple of additional interests of my own that I'll be bringing to the table include environmental humanities and asking questions about how our understanding of landscapes can change our understanding of texts. But then also, I'm a prose specialist and a scholar of the novel. And one of my great research loves is Jane Austen. So we'll be making a special foray to Chatsworth, the great country home that most scholars agree is the basis of Pemberley in Pride and Prejudice. But really, I think what I would like to just emphasize is that when I was learning about this program, you can see how passionate Professor Gillen is about it. But before I even had a chance to talk very much with Professor Gillen, I started hearing from students, and they all almost went into a trance when they talked about their time at Kiplin Hall. And so often they would say something like, "It changed my life," and breathlessly so. And it took me a little while to figure out that really what they were trying to express is that this was a full body experience, and that it was, yes, intellectual and analytical, and they had so much information and content that they hadn't had before, but they were just kind of integrating this into their daily lives in a really unique way. And that was so moving to me. And I think that's really consistent with the kind of human scaled education that we want to provide at Washington College. Okay, so we're trying to keep this snappy because I think actually the best advocates for this program are the students, our recent alumni who took this. They can tell you many of they have the embodied anecdotes. But what I would say is that generally speaking, this trip aims to have about 10 to 12 students. I know people have lots of questions about who can go, or if this is part of, if there are requirements or prereqs. And what I'll just say to you is this is designed to be a very flexible trip. And when we had scheduled a group to go in the summer of 2020, we had people who were, the most dyed-in-the-wool, gung-ho English majors who already loved Wordsworth, to first-year students who'd taken one English class and fallen in love with Jane Austen, to other students who hadn't even really had a first encounter with this kind of literature, but were intrigued by the prospect of hiking through this really rugged and, as you can see, almost kind of otherworldly or magical landscape. This program had a really strong reputation, almost kind of like a mythic status among the students. It was so beloved, and that brought a lot of people into the fold who maybe thought that they weren't poetry people until they started hiking the hills and dales with the Gillens. I'm trying to think of, in terms of other practicalities, generally speaking, we'll try to run the trip close after graduation. This is a summer program, a short-term study abroad program, and it can be taken both as a fully credited course or on a non-credit basis. The budget is still very much in flux because we've been so lucky in the past to benefit from real largesse from donors who subsidized costs. And it's one of our top priorities that no student is unable to attend due to financial need. We have scholarships, and we're very committed to making this program accessible to all students at Washington College who are interested. We're targeting something in the range of about $3,500. But again, no budgets are set until we know more about the state of the world. Like Professor Gillen, I could wax on, and I think I'll cut myself off here, but just to say, this is it's a program that's exciting just to think about. And we love sharing this with Washington College students, and very happy to answer any questions that arise. All right, thanks. I'm turning it back over to Jack Disbow.
Yes, thank you both so much. I was one of those students who will very gleamingly say, like, yeah, this trip changed my life. And it's just so exciting to know that the Kiplin Hall program will continue on, like, under Dr. Charles' guidance. I'm now going to introduce our three alumni panelists. Our alumni will introduce themselves and briefly talk about their experience with the Kiplin Hall program. So I'll start with an old friend of mine. We actually had an internship together, Leslie Collins. So Leslie, if you want to take it away from here.
All righty. Hi there. My name is Leslie Collins, and I'm class of 2019. I actually went on the last Kiplin Hall trip back in 2017. I was an English major with minors in journalism and creative writing. And now I'm working in Washington, D.C. and covering political news for C-SPAN. But in terms of the Kiplin Hall trip, I really loved any excuse to go traveling. So knowing that I would get to travel to 2 different countries I'd never been to before, and learning their history and getting immersed in their culture and studying all of the poetry and literature was just like really appealing to me. And one thing I will say is that I wasn't a huge poetry buff before the trip. But the beauty of it is that you don't have to be in order to really, really love it. And one of my favorite memories was hiking Helvellyn, because it was one of the more difficult hikes on the trip, but there were multiple moments where Dr. Gillen would just have us sit down and he would just start reading Wordsworth to us, and he would be reading this poem and literally pointing to the different land masses, the mountains and the rivers and the valleys that are being described in the poem, and they all look almost exactly the same. And it's just it was amazing, and I've never felt so connected to literature and other people as I did on this trip. And I could really go on and on about it for ages, but I shouldn't. So I'm gonna pass it along to Grace now so that she can tell her side.
Hi, my name is Grace Kim. I'm a 2018 graduate from WAC, and right now I'm an English and history teacher in Salisbury, Maryland. I was an English major and a secondary education minor. So the main reason that I decided to go on the Kiplin Hall program, I kind of just stumbled upon it because I wanted an English study abroad program and I couldn't do the traditional whole semester experience. So I decided to kind of take a chance and go to Kiplin Hall over the summer. And it's without a doubt one of the best decisions I made during my time at Washington College. Probably my biggest takeaway and like most fond memories of the time were the community that you build during this trip. I met people that I never would have became friends with at Washington College, and was so happy to make friends like that during my time there. The relationships that you form with the professors that go there are a lot more intimate than those that you experience in the classroom. You feel like you're friends with them at the end. You hang out all together, you travel together, you experience new things together, and there's really nothing quite like that. And then of course there's the things that Leslie touched on, like there's nothing quite like being in a place that the literature is written about. I wasn't a big fan of the Romantics before I went on this trip, but at the end I signed up for as many of Dr. Gillen's classes as I could afterwards because I could not get enough, and I enjoy teaching them now in my own classroom. It's definitely a once in a lifetime experience going on this trip, and I highly recommend it if you get the opportunity to go. And so I'll pass it along now to John to touch on his experience.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. My name is John Leslie. I am part of the class of 2019. I was a double English and theater major. I actually took on the trip with Leslie, who talked a few moments before. I had heard about the trip through older classmates that I was friendly with, and I'd never traveled abroad. I didn't know much about the Romantic poets, but from what I heard from the other classmates, it sounded amazing, so I decided to go for that summer. And like everyone else who's talking about it so far, it really is a trip of a lifetime, especially for a student who is experiencing travel, experiencing a entire field of literature for the first time, and with a group of people that are just as open and willing to discover a whole new slice of life that you never had before. To share one bit of my experience, we were at the Castle of Richmond for one day, and incredible castle, and we got to go to the little town that's surrounding the castle. We're kind of around exploring the shops and things, and the bus is about to leave in about like 5 or 10 minutes or so. I noticed on a billboard that there is an old theater part of this town. I thought, oh my gosh, I wish I could visit this theater. Frank, who is Dr. Galen's son-in-law, heard that I wanted to go to this, so he grabbed me and a bunch of the other students, and we ran to this theater and kind of barged in. It's sort of like a history museum building as well as a performing arts place. But he said, we have to go see this theater. So we kind of barge in, we get to see the audience, we get to see the stage, and we have this one brief moment of taking in this piece of English history. And then we run and we go right back to the bus and hit on to whatever's next on the trip for that day. And as I think about that moment and the trip and as a whole, you have these big moments of being able to climb a mountain and discover a new poem, these huge monumental things, but also these small, tiny moments where you have to take something in so quickly, but you're able to hold it as well. And that's something that I never experienced before. And I hope that you all get to do the same as you, think about going to Kiplin Hall, going to Washington College, take in all the big moments, but also embrace all these small little ones that you keep with you forever. So that's my little bit. I'm going to bring it back to our MC, Jack Despo. Jack, all you, buddy.
I don't know if I qualify as an MC. John pointed out that he went on the trip with Leslie. I went on the same trip with Grace. That's when we became friends. I actually didn't know she was, that we were the same year at the time. So it was really cool. But thank you to our Kiplin Hall alumni. I would now like to turn things over to our live Q&A session. As a reminder, please utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions for the panel. If we are unable to answer all of your questions today, your student's admissions counselor will be following up later this week as long as we have a name associated with your question. So our first question, what was something you learned that you did not expect from the program? So this one will go out to our each of our panelists.
Do we have an order, or are we just
jump on in?
We're just okay. Something that we learned that didn't expect to. And John and Grace, if you guys want to,
I've got one.
Your immediate answer, go for it.
So a big part of the trip is the hiking. And we kind of take that for granted. This is like a weird nitty-gritty bit that I kind of took away. But one of the things you learn about Wordsworth as he's writing this poetry is that he's going out into the landscape for the first time, going on these personal walks that he wants to, embrace with nature. And that was something people kind of thought of as odd and surprising and strange at the time. And it's because of Wordsworth and his venturings into the mountains, going by the rivers, that he was able to unfold his poetry. And he basically invented walking, is what I kind of discovered, which I found kind of incredible and something that I keep in the back of my brain forever. You discover all these odd little bits about these writers because you're in this landscape with them. You're with them as they're writing their poetry, as they're hiking the same mountain you are. And that's something that the Kiplin Hall program lets you discover. Anyone else?
Yeah, that was a good.
Mine's a little bit less academic based, but I learned how to cook during Kiplin Hall, which I did not know how to do before. I could barely make ramen. But Mrs. Gillen working, you make communal meals, like kind of rotating through who's cooking what night and going to the grocery store. Also had a very confusing experience asking for a pound of meat from the deli people and not getting what I expected at all. So that was a little something that I learned.
Great. So the next question that we have, the question is, how structured is the program? What do students do in their free time? So what do they do, I guess, when you're not hiking or when you're not doing like kind of the class sessions?
I guess I'll start for this one. So the trip is, parts of it are structured and parts of it are not. So every day there were specific things like I know we're gonna hike this mountain at this time, and then we're gonna go to this historical site at this time, and then do this at the end of the day. But in between those specific points, we were allowed to do pretty much whatever we wanted. Like when we were back at Kiplin Hall at the end of a day, we could just relax. We could watch TV. We could explore the grounds. We could just we could go to the pubs. We could go to the restaurants. We could just be students on vacation, like essentially. And then when we were actually doing the academic parts of it, we were hiking and staying together as a group, or we were exploring a town and we might have an hour or so to just go and just explore and learn. So some of it was guided, we were all together and learning, and some of it was just like getting to really explore.
That covered a lot there. Yeah. I know I had a friend named Devin, and him and I watched we watched like all the Monty Python movies while we were there. And there were sheep on the grounds that we like kind of went out and met. You could go out and talk and pet the sheep. That was something that I did in the free time. John or Grace, do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
I want to say that, there is an itinerary. There is a plan, as Leslie said, that you're going to these places, and with these places, you are associating the poem, the text that you're learning that day with the location. And once you're kind of in that setting, you get to experience it yourself. I said you go into the town, look at the shops. We went to so many different tea places, and those are wonderful. End of the day, we returned to Kiplin Hall. Some folks would go out to the pub. Some, like myself, would stay at Kiplin Hall. We just kind of sat around and chatted and just, took a breath and took everything back in. So you do the hikes, you read the poetry, and then you get to make the experience your own with these people around you.
All right, and then Dr. Gillen, you're muted.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm still trying to process watching Monty Python and talking to sheep, but that's just me.
Yeah, I had a very memorable. It was a good time. So the next question I have, and it's good that you're here as well, Dr. Gillen, is Dr. Charles. This might be a good one for you to answer as well. What is the application process like for the program? How do students apply for it? How do they get accepted? How do they get to go on the trip?
It's really an interest-driven application program, and we hope that everyone who wants to come can come. It's not intended to be selective. It usually ends up being self-selective. If there are too many people to be accommodated, then we would prioritize upper class students just because they have less time to make the trip. But there's absolutely no requirement for majors. I think maybe all of the students who are here today are English majors, but there were always students on this trip who were not English majors. And for the trip that I had planned for 2020, we had students who had never even taken an English class, a bunch of first years, it was just this kind of grab bag of people who thought, hey, there's something about hiking and reading poetry and being out in this, kind of ethereal landscape that sounds good to me. And for some people, it's their first time abroad. For some people have done a lot of traveling. So again, it's really just this mix. But I love what several of the students have said about the openness of the people who choose this trip, because that's the key element, is that there's that trust that you all want to make something meaningful together, and that there are lots of different ways that can happen.
Yeah, thank you. So this one's directed to the professors. What's your favorite poem or author that you got, or that you taught or will teach on the trip?
Well, okay. It's really hard. There's a lot of poetry that I really love, but I think the one that was perhaps most memorable most often was the poem by Wordsworth called Michael. And even Jack liked it, my God. We would hike to the location and we would sit in the ruins of a sheepfold that the poem talks about. And I'd pass the book around, everyone would read stanzas of it. And I think even just reading that in that location, especially with the description of the place that we were literally sitting in and watching, really made it come home very vigorously. I think the other ones, the poetry of Emily Bronte, reading that near Top Withens, which is the site that she used for Wuthering Heights. There was a kind of haunting quality about that I really look forward to and enjoyed.
I want the students to have, or the alumni to have a chance to respond as well. But, this is where the genre divide springs up between Professor Gillen and me. So I'm most excited to teach Jane Eyre and to visit the Haworth Parsonage, which is, a very foreboding stone edifice, built like out of stone hewn from the Yorkshire moors on which it stands, with the cemetery right out front. And, as a literary scholar, I've been to many literary museum, but the Haworth Parsonage, I think, has the single most impressive collection of artifacts from the Bronte family. They have the table on which Emily Bronte wrote Wuthering Heights, and she carved her initials into that table. And you can't touch that table because we cannot be trusted with things like that, but you can get within 3 feet of that table and just kind of meditate on this encounter with history. And so that, I would say, the Yorkshire Moors and the town of Haworth, and especially that creepy parsonage museum, that's my favorite bit.
And then, yeah, as Dr. Charles said, if the the 4 of us alumni want to also add what our favorite poem or work that we read for the trip was, I responded to Dr. Gillen's because Michael is the one I always talk about when I talk about Kiplin Hall, so he stole mine. So if Leslie, John, or Grace have any that they want to add, please go ahead.
Okay, there we go. My problem is that I also really liked Michael. So that's the one that stuck out, at least partially because the title's easy to remember. But the other poem that I loved, I'm not sure if you remember it, Professor Gillen, but the one that you read at the top of Helvellyn, and I can't remember what it's called now, but I wrote it in my journal, and my journal is around here somewhere. And I wish I'd remembered to go and find it before sitting here today. But the poems for that day for Helvellyn were definitely my favorite.
The poem you're referring to was written by Sir Walter Scott, and it was called Helvellyn.
Okay, great. Thank you.
John and Grace, do you guys remember any of the works?
I'm a
Dr.
Seamus Hamey fool. When we got to Ireland, we got a couple of those. I appreciated the romantics very much so, but you get to edge a little bit beyond that as well. So when we got a bit of Seamus Haney in Ireland, I really appreciated that.
Dr. Gillen mentioned my two favorite, or at least the two most memorable from the trip as well, were Michael. Yeah.
All right. Our next question that we have, how much hiking experience do you have to have? And the student added, I tend to be a little clumsy.
At least in the past, all you have to do is be able to walk and have a strong will. In fact, what we did do, and this was Barbara's sort of mantra, as we hiked the mountains, some of them were pretty difficult and not everyone was in the same physical shape. And so we had a rule that the front of the pack would stop every 150, 200 yards and make sure that everybody was together, because there's nothing more destructive than looking up and seeing people a half mile ahead of you or something like that. So we did that, and in fact, I don't have time to tell the stories now, but that worked out very well, I think. So I'll leave.
Yeah, I would say that. Should I go or okay? I would say that you definitely don't need any hiking experience. Like I bought a pair of hiking shoes for this trip. I'd never really been hiking before this trip, like not seriously.
Yeah, and I think it's really, it was so noticeable to me talking to both Professor Gillen and Barbara that, every student was able to do these hikes regardless of previous exposure, regardless of fitness level. And that's because it's just it's a group activity and they will take it at we can slow down and, there are lots of breaks. And one of the things that's really exciting is that a lot of the learning happens on the trail. Plop down with the poem and have your discussion. But I think it's a testament to the community aspect of this trip that everyone is able to do these hikes. And I don't think that lots of people would be able to do it on their own, but in this context, people can find a way.
Yeah, thank you guys. This one directed to a little bit of everyone. What kind of classwork do you do for the trip? So there is an academic element. What kind of classwork is expected out of the trip? You're muted, Dr. Gillen.
No. Katie perhaps should answer.
Well, I'll probably be doing things in a slightly different way than Professor Gillen, but I'm always curious to hear the old tricks of the trade developed over a couple decades by Professor Gillen. But the idea is that over this 10-day period, you cover as much content as you would over a semester, right? So that means doing reading in advance and probably about 4 novels and another like 4 or 5 serious kind of tranches or portions of reading, whether poetry or the journals of Dorothy Wordsworth. And it's not meant to be onerous in any way. This is just so that we can make the most of the opportunities we have to just completely immerse ourselves in this material. And I know that when Professor Gillen was leading the trip, and this is something I intend to take forward because I think it's such a brilliant idea, all the students kept a very meticulous journal every day. And I would love to hear from the students a little bit about how they organized that, or, when they wrote it, if they just, I believe it was required to write every day. But I'm curious to hear more about that process, because what an amazing testament to have with you. As Leslie said, I'm sure most graduates of the Kiplin Hall program know where this notebook is somewhere and treasure it, right? It's full of very precious kind of moments and verbal snapshots. So I would say that, there is a significant reading and work that goes into this program, but I think a fair bit of the reading will be done in advance because a lot of the time on the trip will be active.
Did any of the other alums want to add anything about their journals or their experience with classwork? Was it like, what did it feel like, a lot of work at the time?
No, I don't think it felt like a lot of work at the time. And actually, my journal's right next to me. We're in my office area. But a lot of the times when you're working on the journals, that's kind of the community aspect too. Like everyone will be huddled around the table after dinner, all journaling together and reflecting on the day and things like that. And maybe you decide to read the poem for the day on the way to the location that the poem was based off of. And I think that it doesn't feel like academic work. Like you want to do these things. You don't feel like you have to do this kind of work.
One other element that we added in later, Barbara was responsible for this, was a blog where we had each student prepare information about what we were going to be doing the next day. And after dinner, they would give a presentation on whatever might have been, like say, for example, going to Haworth or some other place. And I think that was informative because we had a preview of what was important about the next day. And it was, as far as I know, it may still be posted. It was on the Kiplin Hall, the actual Kiplin Hall website. The thing that I tried to keep in mind was that I wanted people to do the journals, and I collected them at the end of the first week, and then the second week, and then the third week was when I graded them. And there were assignments that were given out before we actually left. And we did, in my early years, I did include a number of novels. And then as time wore on, it became, well, if you haven't finished Wuthering Heights, you should at least see the film, which was not really cheating because there were several versions of it. We'd actually talk about that and the difference between the novel and the film. So there was an array of different things. The other side of that, we did include Ireland. My daughter was the first student from the college to go to University College Cork in an exchange program in the 90s. And she came home with ultimately her husband. Well, it wasn't quite that simple, but anyway, I'm being silly about that. But Frank emigrated to Chestertown, and the first year that he was here, he talked about, well, why don't you go to Ireland? That would make it break up the rhythm of things a bit. So we did. His family helped us to find lodgings over there in a place called Glengariff. And we did essentially the same thing that we did in England. We drove out into the various landscapes and then hiked. Hiking in Ireland is very different from hiking in England. England has trails. Ireland, you kind of make your own way and discover your own way. And it can be quite an adventure, but a wonderful one at that. And there was always some place where we could pop in and have a hot cup of tea, as was well needed. But anyway, I'm rambling on here, and I don't mean to do that.
Our next question: how long is the trip for? When does it start and end? So I think Dr. Charles, the first go.
I'll answer that one. So the trip that was planned for 2020 was designed to be 10 days, and it was scheduled for June 21st to 30th. I think ideally we'll do it a bit earlier in the summer in the future. But yes, Professor Gillen ran trips as long as 3 weeks. But right now we're thinking about a 10-day trip. I reserve the right to modify. But yes, 10 days in the Lake District in Yorkshire is the current plan.
And then this final question for the evening before we announce our winner for the book, and then wrap it up for the night. Uh, this can go to every single panelist here. What advice do you have for students traveling abroad for the first time?
I would say do some research on the, what's expected when you get on a plane and fly overseas. I was completely unprepared. I didn't even know the meal they gave you is for you and you can have it if you want. I was like, I don't know, should I take it or not? Then they hand you a little card for, purpose of intent of flying over. I'm like, do I hand this to the flight attendant? I was completely out of my element and I wish I'd done more research myself to kind of prepare to what to expect. So first time people traveling abroad, learn the protocols, kind of figure out what is needed if we're going from country to country, and pack lightly. Just take what you need and don't get burdened down by too much. You'll be doing lots of traveling. So yeah, research, travel lightly, wear your hiking boots when you go on your plane. That too.
I would definitely say packing lightly would be a big one. I think I brought like 6 of everything that I did not need because we did laundry when we were there. And then I also thought, figure out like I thought we were only allowed to bring a carry-on bag, which was not true at all. So I just had like this little teeny tiny suitcase. So make sure you figure that out too beforehand.
I would say, as in addition to what John and Grace have already said, if you're doing research, research just only a little bit, but just the places that you're going to go to, because you might find, there are the big places that like the must sees, but then there are also like smaller places that you might find that you're interested in. And I think that's why Dr. Gillen mentioned the blog. I liked doing the blog because, I had a place that I had to research and I was like, oh, this place is very interesting. And I got to tell everybody else about all these cool extra places that we could see during our free time. So that could be fun for you.
Ed, I would just add, make sure you bring a waterproof jacket, one that's warm. Summers in Ireland and England are like the weather we're having now.
And my advice, as someone who did the Kiplin Hall trip and was inspired by the Kiplin Hall trip to then study abroad in Cork, Ireland, embrace the adventure of it. You're kind of on like this like very special occasion. Try to make the most of it. You learn more about yourself when you're doing things kind of by the seat of your pants. You get to discover a lot more. You get to, you really dive into it. You really feel like you're being your true self and you're really embracing the area around you and, parts of yourself that you don't really get to do on your day-to-day life. So that's my advice. Dr. Charles, did you have any advice you want to add into?
Well, we're gonna have a checklist, so don't fret too much. But I do think that your best resource is talking to fellow students. The blog is amazing because you can look at the blog from past years just to get a sense of some of the things that Leslie was talking about. And the good news is travel to the UK is not, we're not going to Mars. So what that means is if there's something you've forgotten, we will find a way to get it to you, right? So it takes a little bit of the pressure off. But I think, you will not be the only student traveling abroad for the first time if you're on this trip. And this is a great way to do it.
And Dr. Gillen, do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, just one last thing, and that has to do with beyond Kiplin Hall, which again is a great love, is for you prospective students that your time at Washington College is precious. And I'm saying that because I feel like I was born at Washington College, teaching there after 46 years. But it really, the thing that it's at the core of all of that is learning who you are and how you relate to the world. And that's one of the things that was part of the Kiplin trip. How do you relate to the natural world? And I think looking forward, obviously issues of the environment and issues related to being able to work in coordination with nature and discovering who we are in that process is important. And I think even if you have as your goal to be a CEO of a big corporation or something like that, that's fine. But the attendant issue is what are your responsibilities to the environment, and what are your responsibilities to other human beings? And I think that's those are big questions. And Washington College, I think, provides the atmosphere and the kind of intellectual give and take to allow you to discover who you are and what your relationships are.
Thank you, Dr. Gillen. We're going to wrap things up now. Don't leave just yet, because we're going to announce the winner of the Hiking the Liberal Arts book. But I just wanted to say thank you all for joining us today for Hiking the Liberal Arts, the Kiplin Hall story with Dr. Richard Gillen. If we missed your question, you can expect to have it answered by your admissions counselor in the coming days. Thank you again to Dr. Gillen and Dr. Charles for joining us this evening, as well as our panelists, Leslie Collins, Grace Kim, and John Leslie. We will now announce the winner of the signed copy of Dr. Gillen's book, Hiking the Liberal Arts. Mackenzie S. is the winner of the book. Congratulations. Great job. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again to our panel and Dr. Gillen. And have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much.